This is the Troutbitten Podcast.
Troutbitten.
Troutbitten?
Troutbitten.
Troutbitten.
Troutbitten?
Yeah, Troutbitten.
Troutbitten.
It's about trout.
Wild trout.
This is Troutbitten.
This is the Troutbitten Podcast, and thank you for tuning in. I'm Dominic Swantowski, the owner of Troutbitten and the author of troutbitten.com. Tonight, my friends and I are here to talk about water types and where trout feed in a river. It's good to be in a rhythm with these podcasts. This will be the 32nd episode, and for something that didn't even exist 7 or 8 months ago, it's pretty satisfying to see it grow so quickly. I enjoy it, and I know my friends here do as well. And if you enjoy the Troutbitten Podcast series, there are 2 important things you can do to help out. First, support our sponsors. Use their discount codes and just drop a line to say thank you to those sponsors for being part of this project. Second, write a review on Apple Podcasts. Seriously, that's a big deal. There are about 280 reviews right now, and those reviews and our top rating on the charts is a critical reason why this whole thing succeeds. So thank you to everyone for your support. Tonight's episode is about exploring the water types of a river. But we're thinking beyond just fast water, slow water, riffles, runs, and pools. Sure, recognizing the basic features of the stream you're fishing is a great starting point. But this is Troutbitten, so you know we're going to take things a bit further. We want to know more. And what matters most is where trout are feeding in a river. Find feeding fish. When we're on the water, it's priority 1. The rivers we fish are full of wild trout. They are, seriously, everywhere. But just because trout are holding in a piece of water doesn't mean they are feeding there either. And moment to moment, we're searching for where trout are feeding most. We talk a lot about solving the daily puzzle, about the on-the-river mystery presented anew every time we wet our boots and every time we round the next bend. That mystery really begins with finding feeding fish. Where are the hungry ones? What event or condition has trout ready to feed, on the hunt, or eager to intercept an easy meal? Rivers are in a perpetual state of change, and the trout's feeding patterns respond to those changes. So that's what we're here to talk about tonight. We're ready to break down water types and find feeding fish. All right, I'm joined again by 5 of the best anglers that I know. These guys understand rivers. They fish in all seasons and have done it long enough to see the patterns, to recognize the almost predictable behaviors of river trout as they respond to the changes happening in a river system. So here are my friends, Bill Dell, Austin Dando, Trevor Smith, Josh Darling, and Matt Grobe. Guys, how you doing?
Hey.
Good.
Howdy, howdy.
It always makes me feel good when you call us good fishermen.
I know.
Right?
Best.
I exaggerate.
No, the best. The best he knows is what
The best he
that's how I
knows.
understood.
Yeah.
Some of the best.
Well acquainted with catching big fish.
I couldn't get the best guys that I know on.
That's why it took you 2 seasons to invite me.
Ooh, that's nice.
Oh,
You know, you're still listed last.
Hey,
Second
now.
round of invites.
Why is your name
Yeah,
last
right.
then?
yeah.
Who was first this week? Was it Austin? Austin, were you first this week?
Me.
Bill.
I got first.
See, he knows. He's listening.
He noticed.
And I had to listen to Bill's text messages for 2 years, and my good buddy Dom left me in the dark.
But now the OG Troutbitten is back. Hey, did you guys play in the snow today? Did you like that?
We didn't get any.
You didn't get any? We had
No.
an inch or 2. You had snow on green grass. That's always cool. I like
It
that.
is cool.
I seriously like it. Give me it.
Give me more.
Give me more.
Yep.
No.
People complain about this time of year. I love it. I love
Yeah.
the unpredictable. It's just weather.
It is
I
cool.
like weather.
Yeah. I agree with that.
We had snow every day for the last 7 days.
Yeah. Is it stacking up? Is it stacking up still, Matt?
It's on track to snow more in April than it has combined March and February, which is very bizarre out here.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is weird.
No, my word.
Super weird. But it's, you have, like, out here, the lifeblood's the snow, right? Like, you know,
Yeah.
your entire fishing season is dependent on that. So it's as much as folks want to complain, it's a good thing. And, it's more concentrated in the mountains, so the snow will melt off pretty quick in the valleys, but they're calling for up to 2 to 3 feet this weekend. So let's hope for it.
Feet. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, we need it.
Yeah, we might have had 2 inches today, and I'm kind of excited about it. It's still snowing now a little bit.
Yeah.
Because it was supposed to be an inch, maybe even a little bit more than an inch of rain, but instead most of it came in snow. And like you're saying, man, I mean, I'll take that snow because it's going to help us and affect us for longer as we go on here in the next few weeks. I like it. Hey, let me ask you this, guys. So we did hatches and strategies a couple weeks ago, and I know that for me in the last couple of weeks, the hatches have really changed things. Have you guys seen that? How has it changed your fishing?
Yeah. One of the nice things about the hatches starting is it kind of goes in hand with daylight savings.
Good point.
And I work a regular job where I get off work at 5 o'clock, and now it's light enough, long enough that I can get to the stream after work and feel good about the time I have. And even though I get there and maybe it's starting to get a little dark, I know that some of the best fishing of the evening is still ahead. So it's giving me like renewed motivation and peace in knowing that when I get there, there's still going to be some great action going on.
You've been catching them on top at all?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah,
in the
nice.
last couple of weeks,
Which
it's
bug?
been really consistent. Black stoneflies and
Get out.
random caddis. Yeah, sure enough.
Black stonefly.
Yeah.
Look at that.
Told you.
Didn't we say
Look at
that one
that.
doesn't matter?
I know. We roasted the stonefly on that
I didn't
episode,
roast
but
it.
sure enough.
Grobe was about it.
All right,
I
Grove.
was all about the black
Yeah,
stonefly.
it was all about it.
They're big, though. They're like 12s and 14s.
That's cool. That's really
is-
cool.
Yeah, it's fun. I went out yesterday with Joey on one of our favorite streams, and I only fish dries. I said, I'm not even going to fish a dropper. I just went dries, and I don't know, still caught like 10 fish, and I was having a lot of fun. And I don't usually do that until the hatches really start going. You see a lot of risers. I probably only saw 5 risers, maybe a little bit more than that. But no, I wasn't usually casting to rising trout. I was often surprised by, oh, there's one. I love that. I just love it.
Searching.
For me, it was a caddis. I think they're still responding to that granome pretty well.
I'm pretty jealous listening to all you guys talk about dry
That's
flies.
because you're still having 2 feet of snow.
Yeah,
getting
we
blown out.
went backwards. We went backwards to where
Yeah.
we're literally, I was fishing this past week in winter lies. I mean, we got water temps between 36 and 42 degrees, and
Yeah.
the rainbows have vacated the deeper buckets to spawn. And so it's kind of
Yep.
just a slow, methodical nymphing game this week.
Interesting point, because we're going to talk about something like that, probably toward the end of the podcast. We're going to talk about how spawning activity affects, where you expect to find feeding fish, right? But before that, hey, we have questions still coming in, and I sincerely appreciate them. We don't answer all of them, but as you know, I'll usually answer them in email if we're not going to answer them here on the podcast. But Austin, will you read this one, please?
Yeah, sure. Okay, this question comes from Miles Lucas in New Hampshire by way of email. Hey, Dom, I listened to all season 2 on your podcast, and it really inspired me to give tightline nymphing a try. I've had a really fun few weeks using your monorig formula and trying to follow the 9 essential skills. Here's my question. How do you change leaders? Or do you? I've thought about carrying 2 rods, or maybe a spare spool, one for your nymphing and one for fishing dry flies, because I'm starting to see rising trout, and I don't want to miss them. So how do you prepare for this? Or do you just commit to nymphing all day? Thanks to you and your friends for the great content on Troutbitten. That's a fair question. I think we get that one probably a lot.
Right, I do. I get that one a lot, and really, that's why I wanted to kind of cover this one, because I write about it a lot, and I answer it a lot, and it just continues to come up, and that's all right. What's your response, guys?
I think it's one of the beauties of the monorig is that you get to have some of the versatility of 2 rods in one system. And, I won't speak for everybody, but I know I have fly line behind my monorig.
Yeah.
And so in the right situation, I'm not as fast as you, Dom, but in 3 minutes, I can pull
Easy.
my monorig off,
Mm-hmm.
spool it up, and I have matched fly line on my reel. I put on a Harvey dry fly leader, and I'm casting dry flies and with the same rod. And I pick my rods accordingly, for ones that I feel like can cast reasonably well.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Think
How
ahead.
about the rest of you? Yeah, right.
Right, think ahead, right. Can anybody here carry more than 1 rod? I mean, fish effectively with more than 1 rod at a time. Have you tried it? Do you have a good way to do it?
Not unless I'm in a boat.
Yeah, boats.
That's-
only.
That's the
the
only
thing
way
right
I've found to do it.
Or I've had a successful time doing it if you and your fishing buddy are willing to take turns.
There you go.
Ooh, that's a good thing. That's pretty neat.
Basically fishing.
Yep. You need a caddy.
That's kind of what it is.
I like that.
I have my own rod caddy.
This one will take the 5-weight.
A caddy. That's fantastic. Now, we've said before about how so much of the industry pushes you to be specialized now. When I got into it, everybody said, hey, get a 9-foot 5-weight and you'll be able to do everything. For me now, I can do everything with a 10-foot 4-weight. I know a lot of us are real similar or very close to that. I don't like being specialized with the rod. Like you said, Trevor, I want to be able to do anything throughout the day as I'm waiting with that one rod and with the 1, 2, 3 minute at the most leader change. I'm not carrying 2 rods. I'm just not. I've done it. I've really tried. I really thought, oh, I'll be quicker. No, it slows you down. Does anybody do the spools? Does anybody say, I'm going to change leaders, I'll change my whole spool? Does anybody do that?
You're talking a spare spool for your reel versus
Right.
like a foam rigging spool or like an empty Berkeley trilene reel that you can wind the mono rig onto.
Good point.
What I've done, the last couple guide trips I've had, people have come in and wanted to fish thin, and so we fished thin, and then we switched up, and I said, well, let's fish like the 20-pound butt section.
Yeah.
And then I kind of went through and said, okay, we did some casting and stuff, whether it be streamers, nymphing, dry flies, dry dropper, and we kind of went through the process of try to do this with like 8-pound test versus try to do this with 20-pound test.
Right.
With 20-pound test, you're not nearly as limited and don't need to change as much. The only time at that point you're changing with a 20-pound butt section is when you're throwing 40 feet dries.
Yeah, right on. So, Bill, when you want to change off of your mono rig, whichever one it is, whatever butt section you're using, how do you change?
I carry like I have like a couple empty spools. Like I don't like the foam rigging
plastic spools. You mean?
Yeah, plastic.
They're fine. Yeah.
I just keep an empty one in my vest, in my pack, wherever.
Yeah.
And I just take the mono rig and wind it on, and then I do use the foam rigging spools for a dry fly leader because it's a smaller leader.
Yeah.
Since I fish a longer mono leader, I use like Berkeley, Stren, whatever, like a 4-pound, whatever smaller diameter reel that you can fit in your pack that's empty, or you can just go out to Amazon and find them for a couple bucks.
I use old Maxima chameleon spools, and I have a lot of them. And actually, that's what I sell the Troutbitten leaders on. I bought, 1,000 of them from Germany. That's the only place you can get them. Seriously, I wish I could have got them somewhere else.
He has an ottoman full of them.
That's right. You're sitting on top of them when you're.
That's what ottomans are for.
Yeah.
That's right. There's you lift the seat, and there's all those 1,000 spools.
Yep.
No, I mean that's the way to do it. I don't want to reel up a 30-foot leader on a loon rigging foam. It's the diameter is too small. But the Maxima chameleon spools, or like you said, Bill, the Stren spools, whatever, something like that. 3, maybe even at least 2.5 or 3.5, 4 inches in diameter. I think that's a good way to store a long leader. For me, I am not going to limit myself. I am ready to change leaders and meet those fish with the best tools possible.
You made a good point about, you said 30 feet. And that's a good point to make, because when I started fishing a mono rig, I remember I'm like, well, I want this to be real long, so I'm not limited. So I tied on like 60 feet or something. And what that did is it kept me from changing, because it took a significantly more amount of time to change. And so if you keep it as short as you can and still not be limited in your fishing, that makes it a lot faster of a change.
Yeah, great point.
That's a great point, Josh. I've heard a lot of people say the same thing. Again, there's really no reason, no good reason to have 60 feet on. And here's the funny thing, though. You say, oh, it takes too long to wrap up 60 feet. Well, it probably takes you an extra maybe 30 or 45 seconds to wrap up that extra 30,
That's probably
30
true.
feet. But we are all, I've said this before, a very poor judge at how we're wasting or saving time. And the fact is, none of us here, and probably nobody listening, wants to wrap up 60 feet of monofilament on a Maxima chameleon spool. You feel like you're just wrapping, and going on and on. You just want to fish. Anyway, if you make it easy, you have a chance that you're going to go ahead and make those changes. But if it's hard, if you're wrapping up 60 feet, you won't do it.
So one thing I've noticed over the years is when I first started wrapping it onto that spool, I would crank it down really tight. Like I wanted to get it on the spool really tight. And so then when I went back and used and took that leader off there, it was very coiled up because if you wrap it tight, it's going to stretch the mono and then it's going to kind of jack it up when you try to use it again, and it's just going to come out in balls.
That's a fantastic point.
When you wrap it on there, wrap it gently.
Yeah. Not only are you stretching it, but you're also twisting it when you wrap it real tight. When I'm doing Troutbitten leaders for sale, like you say, Bill, I'm just trying to let it slip through my hands and go on there almost naturally without pulling it. Because, I've learned that for my own leaders, same as you're saying, Bill. That's actually a really good point.
And the river straightens it out. Let it go down current.
Yeah. And one more thing on this, on these long mono rig leaders, if that's what you're using, stretch them. Stretch them. That's all it takes. Stretch them hard. Stretch them. I get 3 or 4 feet in my hands, stretch it. You can feel it. It won't stretch anymore. And then you take the next 4 feet and the next 4 feet. And in like 10 seconds, you're done. Matt, were you going to say something else?
Yeah, I was just going to say, there's times where I get pretty lazy when it comes to the whole leader thing. And I found that I end up tying more buoyant mayfly imitations or caddisfly imitations to suspend a small dropper, which I really don't see a need to switch out to the dry fly leader when I'm fishing in that way. And I keep the standard mono rig on, but I do enjoy that extra weight down there. But you have to tie different for it. If you're really getting specific on a mayfly imitation with whatever, wood duck wings and it's tough to suspend a heavy nymph with a tungsten bead. But if you get creative and add a little widow's web, you hear me talk about widow's web all the time because it's my favorite.
Yeah, we're back to the widow's web.
I love widow's web, and
that's so
it can suspend those nymphs. Then you can really shoot some line out and do your fair share of dry fly fishing that way.
Yeah, you certainly can. I do a lot of tight line dry dropper on the mono rig, and we've talked about that. I also I'll fish if I see 2 or 3 rises. I won't switch leaders, and quite honestly, the mono rig will give you a really nice, really nice presentation at short distances with smaller and not too air resistant flies. Hey, thanks for that question, Miles. That's a good one. Glad to kind of get a chance to address that here on the podcast. Precision Fly and Tackle is a family-owned business with a passion for the outdoors and a sense of adventure. They are anglers who enjoy every moment spent on the water with family and friends. Precision Fly and Tackle carries the widest selection of Euro rods, reels, lines, leaders, flies, and accessories. From the beginner to the advanced angler, Precision Fly and Tackle can outfit every angler, no matter the budget. Visit them online at precisionflyandtackle.com. Then use code TROUTBITTEN10, that's the number 10, for 10% off your order. Gear up with Precision Fly and Tackle for your next adventure. If you want to maximize your time on the water, you need to have all your patterns well organized. Fulling Mill offers a custom range of fly boxes with the Euro nymphing angler in mind. Made from a strong polycarbonate with dense slotted foam, they're extremely durable. From the pocket box, which is perfect for anyone who likes to keep it fast and light, to the Tactical Max, which has a middle page and can hold up to 960 flies, you'll be covered for any situation. To check out all 7 of the custom fly boxes, go to fullingmill.com or ask for them at your local dealer. Hey, before we move into the topic, Josh from Wilds Media here. Tell everybody a little bit about what we've been working on.
Yeah, so if you guys haven't been following along on the Troutbitten website or on YouTube, we've been putting out a series of videos we're calling Troutbitten Tips. And actually, this next one is going to help a lot with this question. And if you guys ever wonder if you really can change out leaders that fast, you can time dom yourself next week or in a couple weeks when we drop this one, because we just filmed a video on just how to efficiently and speedily change leaders. So
yeah, Josh and I, we're on every other week, right?
That's right.
YouTube videos, Troutbitten Tips. and we'll do it at least until Christmas, right?
That's right. It's gonna keep
It's
hammering
fun.
them out.
This time last year, Troutbitten was articles. I wrote articles. I love it. I still do. It might still be my favorite thing to do. And there was no podcast. Now there's a podcast. This time last year, there were a few videos that you and I had done, Josh, but now it's a video every couple of weeks. That's pretty neat. I was talking to John Frazier from Sims, and he said, well, Troutbitten is a multimedia company now.
That's right.
And that's like the first time, seriously, it's like the first time it hit me. I went, it kind of is. It kind of is. So it's pretty neat.
Cool.
I don't know. It's neat to see it grow, and I thank all of you guys for that too. All right, let's do this. Let's get into it. Exploring water types and where trout feed in a river. So the way I see it, there are a number of factors that encourage trout to move into and feed in certain types of water. While the real-world conditions and events are infinite, there are about a half dozen major factors that influence where and how trout feed in a river. Let's say they are water temperature, water levels and water clarity, hatches, bugs, and bait fish activity, the things trout eat, light conditions, and then spawning activity. So perhaps the best way to approach this topic is to run through each of these conditions, talk about how they happen, and how trout respond. Like many of our topics in these first few seasons, there's a lot to cover here in a short time, and that's okay. Because this overview sets up future podcast episodes where I'm sure we'll do a deep dive into some of these topics, these river conditions, and how they factor into trout feeding habits. Sound good, guys?
For sure.
Yep. Sounds great.
Cool. So let's start with water temperatures. I think this is probably the most influential of all. You guys agree or disagree with that? Water temps.
I agree, from a physiologic standpoint, because I think you can argue probably that bug and bait fish and hatches play a role here as well in terms of the essentials for the life of a trout.
Sure.
But water temperature is life or death for a trout, and it has so much to do with the dissolved oxygen capacity of that water. And so they don't have at some level, trout do not have a choice. Water light conditions and clarity, they make some preference choices, but temperature is survival. And so I think it is. You got to put it up there.
That's a good way to put it. And a lot of the bugs that are going to happen, well, they don't hatch when the water's 35 degrees anyway.
That's right.
I think that's what we'll find is there's plenty of overlap here as we continue to talk about it. But for me, definitely the first thing I'd like to talk about is water temperatures.
Let's hear it, Bill.
Yeah. Do you disagree, Bill?
So here,
I thought you would.
No.
So if you have more water, if water level is higher and there's more volume of water, you're more likely to have a more stable temperature.
But that still makes the point that temperature is the more important factor.
That's a good counterpoint.
You just proved my point, Bill.
Counterpoint.
But if you had more water, the temperature would be lower.
Still have low water and it'd be cold though.
Yeah, and you can have high water and you can have asphalt runoff where the water's warm in the summer. All those thunderstorms that pour water off into the creek.
It's a good call.
Just because it's higher doesn't mean it's necessarily cooler from my experience.
No, but Bill's saying that the higher water, the more volume of water there is, the more chance that it's going to be stable. And trout like stable temps.
Yeah.
Sure. But it's still all about temps.
Yeah, there you go. Right. And so really, this gets us to that. Through the years, I've read this a lot. I want to actually give a shout out to Devin Olson in Tactical Fly Fishing. Is the most recent time that I've read about this. But all of us kind of see these same things. There's a metabolic change in trout. When the temperature is in that peak range, that prime range, trout are feeding. And you will find that those trout, when those temperatures are prime, they actually need to feed not just twice, but 3 times as much. They need to eat 3 times more when the temperature is 60 or 62 than when it's 35. And that's the way it is. And so you have this metabolic change. They have to eat more in those prime temperatures. And as things warm up, you kind of get this 3-dimensional feeding, like you've talked about, Trevor. The river starts to open up, and that's really what's happening to us now. Joey took my oldest son, Joey, took the temperature at 57 the other day on one of our streams. I said, no kidding. I made him show it to me.
Wow.
And he took it in a couple different spots, and I was like, well, there you go. The first time I kind of heard about this prime temperature was from Joe Humphreys, right? And I remember him saying it was like 62 degrees, 58 to 62, I think he said, And boy, you guys have seen that. And that's when the trout are feeding the most or willing to feed the most because they need to feed more because their metabolism has increased, all right? But so under 40 degrees, I find them sitting in slower water. I kind of expect less from the fish. It doesn't mean I catch less fish necessarily, but the trout just aren't going to move very much, and they do feed in slower water. You guys agree with that?
I agree with that, Dom.
Yeah.
Usually, and I think you had brought up Devin's book, and I think he elaborates on it in his book. In the winter, there's also a point in the day where 80% of the time they are laying in that slow water, but right. The prime window in winter might be 38 degrees at 2:30 to 3:30, and those fish will move into a little bit faster water. So if you're looking at, strategies, depending on what time of year you're in, you can always keep that in the back of your head when you're approaching winter water, that they may feed active. It's just going to be for a shorter window and a little bit less moving water.
Right on. So it's what they get used to as well.
I was going to ask about that.
Right? Like a temperature swing in the winter can really get them moving and maybe even into a little bit faster water and moving almost as if it's prime conditions all of a sudden. And so that temperature drop, though, in the spring, like we had today, actually didn't fish today, but a temperature drop in the spring can really shut them down. We've seen that too, right? It really is what they get used to. And all these things are so nuanced. But anything under 40 degrees, we're kind of expecting them in slower water and trying to approach them there. And then 40 to 50 degrees, trout start to really move and spread out a bit.
Yeah.
They'll feed not just in that lower and slower stuff and not like toward the back end of the runs, not necessarily just the softer stuff, but then they'll start to move into the middle stuff or maybe even into the heads of the runs, right? And then I'm going to say 50 to 60 degrees. Now you're really getting into that prime temperature. And you can kind of catch them in a lot of different water types. And they're often spread out and feeding almost opportunistically.
Right.
And again, this is, coincides with bug activity.
Yep.
And then you start to find that. Austin?
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. Like if you have a full day to fish on a day when water is in that prime range of temperatures, you can fish that hatch throughout the whole cycle. So you get there in the morning and you can find them in one water type and maybe an intermediate water, right before it gets the sun over the mountain, and as the sun comes up and things start to change, the fish move into the faster riffles, and then they start to move up into eating emergers, and then on top, and you can fish a bite window actively throughout that whole day.
I love that.
And that's true. Bite windows in and of themselves are real things.
Yes.
And bug activity is a great way to illustrate that.
That's what we're looking for. That's what I'm looking for is the next bite window.
Yeah.
That's a real opportunity to kind of go bang, 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 fish after fish.
Right.
You get your pattern right. You get the water type right. That's a reward to me. It's like, I found it.
And the point of that is too, like, not just to be content with catching nothing until the next bite window just shows up on its own. It's you're actively pursuing to find it.
Yes.
And that's where the fun is, because you have to believe it's out there, and then you're going to lock into it. You're not just going to wander around and wait for the fish to come to you.
Yeah. You have to believe it's out there.
Yeah.
That's nice. You're like the X-Files.
I liked what a couple of you guys alluded to.
You're like Mulder.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I liked what a couple of you guys alluded to. I think, Josh, you were saying how there's some relativity to temperature change too that can turn bite windows on. Like if the water temperature is sitting at 68 degrees and you get a thunderstorm and it drops to 64, boom,
that's a
bite
good
window,
thing.
right?
Yeah.
Like their metabolisms kick on. They don't need quite as much oxygen, and so they can expend that energy to feed. And vice versa, if it's springtime and you get a warm rain and all of a sudden we warm up 2 or 3 degrees, like the same thing could happen on the other end of the spectrum. So I think that's kind of a cool concept.
Yeah, it's not an accident.
When I'm out there and I see change, I generally get excited, usually,
Yeah.
Just change. Yeah.
Josh and I were night fishing a couple nights ago, and we had one of the most dramatic temperature shifts I've ever felt.
Oh, that was bizarre.
On a river.
Air temperature.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was probably it felt like a 20 degree swing, and yet it was such a mixed front coming in that we kept feeling the back and forth for about half an hour at least.
Yeah.
We were getting hit with really warm air and then really cold air, and it was just wild. And that's right about when I snagged a fish. So bite window was on.
Did you literally snag them, or did you actually get them to eat your fly?
How does
that work?
I think he hit my fly, but where the hook was, it was not
catch him
real
by the
convincing.
mouth. Yeah.
Did not catch him in the
But
mouth.
man, we thought it was big.
Yeah, it made him feel gigantic.
My uncle always said they fight so much better when you snag them.
So true.
We didn't do it on purpose. I just want to clarify. My Uncle Brian
That's great.
did not do it on purpose. But no, that's kind of a funny thing.
Yeah.
Hey, 50 to 60 is seriously where it's kind of my favorite range. You know, like I said, it kind of spreading out. You can almost catch them in every water type. And then for me, I think that's 60, maybe 62 to 70 or 68. You probably shouldn't be fishing for them when they're clear up to 70. But I then find them in the fastest water that I do all year. And some of our favorite streams, I often say like, hey, I catch the biggest fish of the year in those really fast, heavy runs. Well, if I think back to it, it's really, you know, in May, June, even early July and maybe mid-July. And I love those heavy runs. I love that feeling. The water's just pushing on you. You kind of have to fight your way into the next spot. I love that. I have some great memories. And then all of a sudden you're into the biggest fish of the year too. In that temperature range, you know, 60s and closing in on 68, 69 when we stop fishing for them.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the temperature ranges, right? How they respond differently and where they might be sitting in different water types. But let me ask you this. Does this mean in those prime temps, are we always going to have the best chance then at catching the most trout? Do you guys feel that way?
I think there's other factors at play there.
Yeah.
And we alluded to it a little bit earlier, but I did with the spawning. So you can have prime temperatures right now. You know, if it warms up out here, we could have prime temperatures at the end of April or first week in May, but there's a chunk of the fish population that's not in those buckets.
Yeah.
And so I might not catch as many fish that I would in June after runoff when it goes back into those ideal temperatures when the entire fish population's back in the system.
Nice. That's it, right?
Good point.
I mean, we'll fish all winter and do quite well, you know, especially on some of the better days in the winter. I'll catch just as many fish in the wintertime as I do in May or June, right in the middle of hatch season.
Yeah. And fish are consolidated sometimes more than others, you know, when the temperature's colder. So you get the right spot, you get the right drift, and you can sometimes just kind of run on repeat for a few minutes.
Yeah.
And maybe they're more predictable. I keep going back to this 3-dimensional idea like you brought up, Trevor. I just love that.
Yeah.
You said all of a sudden, you know, when the water temperature rises, the trout's response becomes more 3-dimensional and our approach becomes that. We are using every level of the water, middle, bottom, top, the whole thing.
Yeah.
Because the bugs are doing all these things and the trout are doing all these things. But in the winter, we know where the trout are going to be. It's low, it's usually slow, and if you can get great dead drifts at them, you're going to get those fish, especially if you know where they're sitting.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the longer you fish all 4 seasons, the kind of better your perspective becomes on how good spring is and early summer versus, you know, fall and winter. You know, you read the books and it's always, you know, pushing spring and the hatches, and this is when it gets really good. It doesn't push the winter time. Doesn't push the egg bite, you know? And the more you fish in the winter and experience some of those days where you're thinking, man, you know, I can't believe it's this good. And you think about, you know, spring, and you get some of those days too. But I think what spring offers is maybe more consistency in having those maybe numbers or fishing activity, fish in the net than wintertime does. I think to me, the predictability of that is a little bit higher in springtime.
That's nice.
Yeah, and sometimes you get to experience some kind of boost, like we were talking about. Like their bodies eventually get used to feeling that metabolic change, and so maybe things slow down, even if the temperatures are the same. Early spring, you get to experience that change, and so you notice maybe a boost in activity. and then it tapers off
Nice.
as they continue to experience that weather, and even their metabolism still might be running similarly. The eagerness goes away a little bit.
Tactical Fly Fisher was started in 2015 by Fly Fishing Team USA angler Devin Olson, with a mission to bring American anglers the techniques and gear that dominate the international competitive fly fishing scene. While you may have no desire to compete, you can still benefit from the same strategies which competitive anglers use to make them more successful on the water. Whether you want to buy a Euro nymphing rod, a stillwater fly line, or just some hooks and beads to fill your fly box, we've got you covered. And our teaching materials will help you learn how to use whatever products fill up your cart. Head on over to tacticalflyfisher.com and use the code TFF10 to get 10% off flies, fly tying supplies, or terminal tackle.
Water is essential for life, but for Orvis, it's the blood of the brand. Orvis has been the leader in fly fishing since 1856. No other brand can match the explorative and innovative spirit they bring to the water today. Everything at Orvis is about inspiring and empowering adventure and wonder in nature, rooted in the vitality of fly fishing, fueled by passion and curiosity for the outdoors. Orvis designs and develops products and experiences, providing the knowledge and expertise to enable more meaningful moments and connections in nature. With over a century and a half of experience in the field and on the water, Orvis seeks to ignite that passion in others.
Dom, you probably remember we used to have this discussion on the forum often about coming out of winter. We always said we hit that March lull.
Yeah.
And it was always challenging to break through that. And sometimes we'd chat and say, hey, maybe it's harder because there's more bugs. It's more diverse. Yeah, the fish are more active. Yeah, they're starting to move into different locales, but you got to match the hatch and you got to search out different water. So in a way, it kind of becomes more challenging than old winter.
Yeah.
I like March. That's my favorite month.
Welcome back, Bill.
Well, Bill, it's not hard to throw a sucker spawn.
That's right. It's
That's right.
the sucker spawn hatch. You can't
Whatever they're eating.
It's a fun month because it can be, like you were talking, it's dynamic.
I like that. For me, like you're saying, Matt, when you were living here in PA, we do see a slowdown from that egg bite, which lasts all winter long. And then all of a sudden, the olives are hatching. For me, it has gotten better. I used to say March was so unpredictable.
Yeah.
Now I really start to follow that olive hatch. And I will throw 18s and even 20s for a nymph. And of course, if they're rising up top, I'll match that. The next thing that really comes is that sucker spawn. And I'm ready for it. Boy, if you can find those spots.
That's the greatest
right?
hatch of the year. That's my favorite.
It kind of is. Let's address that a little bit later. So we talked about water temperatures. How about water levels, water clarity? That's a really big factor. I'm kind of grouping those together. Maybe you guys wouldn't, but hey, I'm in charge. So I don't know. Maybe that's not funny. Seriously, I really feel like, when the water comes up, it often comes with less clarity. Anyway, what do you think? How does that affect where the trout are going to feed, and how does it change your approach?
When the water level comes up, I like the absolute head of the run or the absolute tail of the run.
Tell us more.
Because I feel like those are the 2 points where it's a little bit shallower and there's a little less current for the fish to fight.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying like the fastest part of the run, like right where it breaks, right where the run or that hole usually breaks, there's usually a little wall behind that creates a little bit of a slow seam. And so I'm looking for that, and I'm looking at tail outs because, again, that's where it's the slowest. And so if I'm a fish, that's where I'm going to go to eat.
Yeah, I agree with that, Bill, too. And the other thing is when the water is up, the heart of those runs, I mean, by the time we even get our flies down there, we're out of the game. So oftentimes for me, I feel like I'm almost wasting my time trying to get to the bottom of those runs, and my flies are just getting, if I'm nymphing, it takes so much effort to actually get an effective drift in there that I'll kind of do the same thing. I'll kind of hit the bookends of that.
The bookends. Nice. That sounds like something Trevor would say.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So what was it? Smart, something smart.
I'll take it.
Right, he is the smartest. Let's just acknowledge it. Trevor's the smartest of all of us. Most educated.
There you go. Yeah, that doesn't always come with the smarts. But so like water clarity, like in addition to the levels there, clarity I think does something on the if turbidity being like how kind of dense or how much particulate matter is in the water. So high turbidity meaning like it's hard to see through.
Muddy.
Muddy. When the turbidity is high, it almost mimics low light conditions in some regards.
Right.
Right.
Love that. Yes,
so
sir.
it does kind of, I think, create a situation in which trout can be more eager feeders or more less selective feeders even because they are kind of having to hit whatever's near them and make a quick decision. Now, I think a caveat to that is that if you add sunlight into high turbidity water, we've all seen how that can decrease effectiveness, right? Because they're blinded almost, right? It's like driving with your headlights on in the fog. It's like you can't see a thing, right?
High beams.
High beams in the fog. There you go.
Disco.
Right.
Do you think they get?
Yeah, there's nothing worse than dirty water in the sun.
The worst.
Yeah.
The worst.
It really is.
Not fair.
Do you guys think that they treat it similarly to low light conditions and start looking up more in muddy water?
Oh, that's so you're saying, Josh, you believe that at night trout feed up. They want to see the silhouette above them.
Yes.
Yes.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I agree with that. And yeah, I find that at night. I don't know if I see that correlation with dirty or muddy water.
Well, I just think something's, if it's above them, then something is causing some disruption to the light that's hitting them. I'm just wondering if
There
that,
you go.
causes any kind of eagerness
I understand.
to feed.
I've tried that because I've thought the same thing.
Right. It should work.
At times, I feel like I've caught fish doing it, but I can't dial in enough to say that it's always consistently
Sure.
a thing.
I will say I use bigger patterns typically in both conditions. Like when the turbidity's higher, when the water's off color, I want something that either gives the fish something to sense with its lateral lines or is just a silhouette that's bigger for them to pick out. And I like darker colors. So in that sense, Josh, I think I'm similar to how I fish at night.
So, the standard advice, like for high, dirty water, is to fish the banks, right? Just because the theory is that trout get up from their midstream holding points and they just go over to the bank. And really, those banks, that bank water, that softer seam, let's say, because it's being broken up by logs and rocks and, bank currents over there, should hold bait fish that are maybe getting displaced or dislodged, and maybe it's holding worms and I don't know, terrestrial insects that are getting washed in. And so maybe that bank water is really appealing to those trout. I do find that works often, not always.
I'll chime in there,
Please.
in regards to out here. So I think we have it easy out here in regards to the whole bank water situation because we know approximately the third week in May, second week in May through the end of June some years, the water's going to get high and it's going to stay high and it's going to be extremely powerful. I mean, imagine those fish trying to fight that flow for that long, right? They're naturally going to go straight over to the bank and seek that refuge from the current. Whereas back home in PA, you guys deal with more of a wave train. Thunderstorms here and thunderstorms there, but the water's always coming up and down. And so I think, Dom, to your point, maybe sometimes they move over to that bank water, but if it's not going to be a sustained thing, why wouldn't they stay behind, mid-river and hang out in that current, right?
There's plenty of food there too.
Yeah, I think it's all the pounders that move to the bank because they don't have the prime lies.
You know.
And the prime lies with the big fish, they're just like, I don't care. I mean, I've still got my cushion.
Right. Like Matt says, if it's sustained, then they'll go, okay, it's going to be like this for a few days. I'm going to go over there and pick on the bait fish. These are all theories, right? I mean, none of us know for sure. By contrast, you have the low, clear water where they need protection. And at that point, like spooking trout becomes the primary concern. Low, clear, almost drought conditions if you have that in the summer. Those trout are often driven into like the deepest parts, still with flow, still with moving water coming through, but the deep green stuff with flow. Matt, you remember our buddy Pat Burke always said that he loved fishing some of our biggest rivers at the lowest flows. He's like, give me those drought conditions, because he knows exactly where those trout are going to be. And that's a fair point. It can be some of the most predictable fishing of the year.
I think high water I think the two extremes can force fish into locations that you can easily predict.
That's nice. Tell us more.
So if you've got like we were talking, high flows, they're going to go to the bank. They're going to go to the softer water. And so that forces them to be predictable because they're forced into going there. Average flow and average water level, they could be anywhere. And so you have, let's say, 100 yards by 100 yards square to cover, versus if you're elevated water or very skinny water, that they're going to be in, let's say, 20 yards of that 100-yard stretch of river.
Sometimes, yeah.
It's an interesting point. And Dom, you mentioned the layers before, like how all this kind of molds into this whole theory. But high water, you don't have as many people fishing, right? And so the fish are actually going to be more secure on the banks as opposed to when the water drops and you get a lot of people fishing. That's just more boot traffic wading into those prime lies that are potentially going to move those fish into different lies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we got temperatures. We got water temperatures. We have water levels and water clarity. And then there's really the hatches, the bugs, and the bait fish activity. These things, they will really move trout into an area of water where they're going to feed. And we follow that. We talked about this 2 podcasts ago on the hatches and strategies. And again, it's not just the hatches, but sometimes the bait fish too. What do you guys see out there?
I think this is one of the most obvious and yet one of the most nuanced ones, because yes, it is hatches, bugs, and bait fish activity, but then the water type that the fish will target to feed on said hatches, bugs, and bait fish activity depends upon the specifics of that species. We talked about caddis not really spending a whole lot of time on the surface of the water, right?
Yes.
And we talk about some other mayflies that may sit there for 5 minutes drying their wings. And so whether those fish are needing to feed on them in the riffles, or they're gathering in pools to pick them off, or the nuance is kind of great between the different food sources in that regard. But if you can learn a little bit about that fly or that hatch or that particular bait fish, you can sometimes then target the fish that are targeting that food source.
That's a great point.
Nice. And adding to that, what we've talked about right just now between water clarity and water flows and temperatures, that all plays into hatches, bug activity, bait fish activity too. So I think these things kind of do layer and nuance one another and build on top of each other.
Yeah, and knowing that the stoneflies have to crawl out. They don't emerge, but they crawl out. They'll often kind of start going to the banks, and then they find something to crawl up on, whether it's a rock or the actual bank or an in-stream log. So seriously, I will fish my stonefly nymphs, in shallower water when I know they're really active.
Right.
And mayfly duns, like that classic dry fly water is kind of flat, not too much riffle. And that's where trout really are often feeding the most there. But you can find trout feeding on, let's say, sulfur duns, because sulfurs are kind of what do they call them? Clingers. The sulfur nymph is a clinger style, so it's strong. And so it's feeding, it lives its whole life in the faster, the more riffled it runs.
That's great stuff.
So where they're going to be emerging. And trout will pick them off in that kind of water. Whereas other mayflies, they do. They live in different kinds of water as a nymph, and they are more available to trout, further down in the run. These things are subtle, but like you said, Trevor, knowing about your hatches at this point, knowing about your bugs and your bait fish activity, what are their habits? Boy, that makes a big difference when it's time.
So along with the sulfurs, you have and any of the mayflies, you have kind of the spinner fall at the end of the day. What you'll see a lot of times is the spinners will hover over the head of the run in the shallow water. And so when I'm fishing a spinner fall, that might be where they're going to drop. But if I'm going to target the spinner fall, I'm going to be at the tail of the pool, because the tail of the pool is slower. So they're going to drop quick. They're going to come through that run quick. and then they're going to kind of, the spinners are going to spend more time on the water and be an easier meal at the tail out of that pool. So, the big wise fish might sit at the back of that, hide beside a bush, and just sit there and sip spinners all evening after they pop off, or drop, I should say.
Those spinners kind of collect in that kind of water too, right? And a trout can come up and eat 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 spinners all at once, and
Yep.
Same thing with terrestrials too, right? I mean, well, not exactly the same kind of water, but trout are moving to certain types of water to go get those terrestrials.
Yeah, just think about the time of year that happens too, Dom, as
right.
The water level gets lower, that high sun becomes a thing. That terrestrial season coincides with midsummer, late summer, and so those fish flock to those vegetation overhanging branches because that's where the ants are going to fall. That's where the beetles are going to fall. That's where the hoppers are going to fall. But it also gives them more cover, at the same time, the shady bank, right? At least that for me, that's what I typically tend to target come terrestrial season is, where are those fish going to lie to capitalize on those terrestrial opportunities.
For sure.
Grobe, that's a cool point you just made there, which is if you can ever take two of these conditions and sort of combine them,
there you go.
Then you're talking magic, right? Because you put that bankside lie, you're under that overhanging tree, you got that little shady spot, and guess what? That's where the ants are falling off the tree or whatever it might be. Yeah, that's cool.
So we talked about the bugs, but again, we brought up the bait fish. And some of you guys know what I'm talking about when I say the killing fields. On one of our favorite streams, like Austin, you should know this. And our buddy Sloop, I think, is the one who termed it the killing fields.
Yeah.
It's where crayfish are they're everywhere on the rocks. It's like usually summertime. I don't know if it's raccoons, birds, everything just seems to be eating them. And again, it's summertime, and in this pocket water, in this piece, it's like maybe 200 yards long. And there's plenty of other places like it, but we call this area the killing fields because there are crayfish on every rock. It smells like seafood. It seriously does.
Yeah.
And there are crayfish everywhere. And for whatever reason, they are very available at that time. It is predictable. And if you throw something that looks like a crayfish in the water, you're going to catch fish. I mean, you don't have to have a dead drift even. It's a really cool, predictable thing. It's almost like the suckers spawning.
That's cool.
Is it in the summer? I feel like at some point in the summer they might molt.
I think so too, Bill. Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know the details.
Yeah, and they're real soft.
Yeah, it could be that they're just getting they molt and they get softer, and so
easier to eat.
Yep.
Yeah, so there's an example of a bait fish actually being more available, and trout don't miss it. I mean, they're experienced. They've been through it before. Maybe even genetically, it's imprinted. Like, I'm going to the killing fields in July. I love it.
That's a Troutbitten short. That's a good movie coming up. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, Josh and I have, and I'm sure you too, Dom, night fishing. I've seen times at night under the moonlight where you'll see see the bait fish jumping out of the water in schools. In 6-8 inches of water as those bigger trout cruise into the shallows. I mean, it looks like the only other thing I can think of is sharks in the ocean and fish trying to get out of the way of them, right? And it's just crazy. But that same concept applies certainly where those bait fish congregate.
Night is like, everything is different. I know that's why we love it so much. It is like bait fish time though, too. What you just said, if I ever spot, sometimes I'll just spot the shallows. I can't believe some nights how many sculpins and crayfish, right, Josh?
Yeah. Yep.
And so on the best nights, there are bait fish available in the shallows, and those biggest trout in the system go to the shallows to pick on those bait fish. And they know they're going to be there, I assume, and on the best nights, we get to catch them, Those trout will go into water that is 6-8 inches deep sometimes. They would not be there.
Yeah.
On a July on a July afternoon with the sun high, they're not going to be there. They're too exposed. But boy, they'll do it at night, and that's just another condition. It's a river condition that is almost predictable. In those best times, you really get to meet trout on their own terms again.
Yeah, well said.
What about light conditions? Let's move into that. You think that matters much?
Oh yeah.
Tell us.
So I think low light conditions will allow the fish to kind of move and feed anywhere.
Sure.
Meaning,
Almost like we were just saying at night, that matters a
Exactly.
lot.
A lot of times, if I start early in the morning and it continues to be low light, I may focus on the shallower side of the river because I know it's low light, and so the fish
Nice.
might migrate into that. Versus if the sun starts to come up, I may not fish that left side that's 6 or 8 inches deep. I'm going to fish the heavier run because the fish is probably going to migrate there and tuck behind a couple big rocks.
Cool. Yeah, right on.
I think that fish species can play a role in that type of
I think so
finickiness,
too.
Bill. I think
Sure.
that out here, especially, I couldn't agree with you more. On a sunny day, I find that brown trout are way more weary with that type of lighting than rainbow trout. And let's face it, if you've been out here in the summer, it's sunny every day, basically from mid-June till the end
No
of
escape.
August.
Yeah.
And the fishing's still good, and it's still good because the rainbow trout still eat. And I don't know why. I don't know what the genetics is there, but brown trout are much more susceptible to that lighting than rainbows.
Yeah.
Good point. I would say brookies are also more acceptable of sun.
Yeah. Yeah, they'll tolerate it for sure. I agree with that.
I keep seeing these videos of New Zealand fishing in gin clear water with giant brown trout,
Those are browns, yeah.
right in the sunlight.
I know.
And I just wonder if it's at a certain size they don't care anymore.
Right.
Well, think about it. They could have less predators. They could have less pressure.
I think
mean,
that's
some of that
it.
could play into that reasoning a little bit
Yeah.
anyway.
For sure.
I agree.
I've said it before. I think for brown trout, anyway, which is what we fish for here the most, wild browns, I think the sunlight, especially when it's upstream and it's therefore in the fish's eyes, I hate seeing that. And if I can, I'll go around a bend.
Yep.
If I can, I'll find the shady bank, like you were saying, Bill. I'll start on that side, on that shady side. Whatever I can do to keep the sun, the direct sun, out of the trout's eyes. We know what way they're facing. They're facing into the current. That's a big deal to me, seeing those light conditions. And everybody says, "Oh, what a beautiful day it is out here." I'm like, no, it's not. it's not.
Yeah.
Like give me some rain, give me some clouds at least. I'd so much rather have shady days than those bright sunny days.
So I think all of us fish during the spawn in the fall. Do you guys notice that the majority of the fish will migrate towards those really shallow, gravelly runs where fish are spawning? And so, yeah, if you're fishing a pool, you might come across a fish or two where normally you might move or see a handful of fish in that pool.
Right on. We all acknowledge, like, none of us fish over spawning fish. I literally try to avoid them. But we know that whether fish are spawning or not, many of them are going over to that gravel that's like knee deep. They're going over into that knee deep water, and trout will eat their own eggs, and if they're going to set up behind some reds, 20 feet, 30 feet downstream of it, I'll fish that. If that's their eating, again, I'm going to meet them on their own terms.
Yeah, I think that's right on, Dom. I mean, out here, it's spawning season like all the time.
Yeah.
So
Because
the
of the
brown
rainbows.
trouts, the rainbows and the cutthroats. And there's
Okay.
basically two different spring spawning seasons, and everybody wants to draw attention to the fall brown trout spawn. But the reality is there's a ton of rainbows spawning right now. And then when the bulk of fishermen come out here, the cutthroats are starting to spawn. And so if you stick to the deeper buckets, like you're saying, Dom, I mean, in fish and egg, I mean, it's going to be productive because it's in the system all the time. But from a strategy standpoint, the nice thing about having multiple species in the river is that life goes on for the species that's not spawning, so you can kind of fish normal.
Nice.
And while those other fish are kind of in the side channels, and really effectively avoid that if you choose to do so.
That's a great point too, especially when you have rivers big enough to do that, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Say if I'm looking to be successful around that time and adjust to the changes that are happening, I usually look for, well, I guess the best of both worlds. I want to find the head of a run that's within 40 feet or so of a flat stretch like that, because I think that that's where you're going to see the funnel of natural food, as well as that occasional drop off from the reds.
Right on. There you go. Bill, talk about the sucker spawn. We have acknowledged this, I don't know how many, 3 or 4 times throughout this podcast, but we have a lot of suckers here. They'll get up to 18, 19 inches, maybe 20 inches, but they're fat. And they spawn in a short period of time, and they drop a lot of eggs. Bill loves it. We all
love it. My buddy Greg makes fun of me. He's like, "You chasing?" And I said, "Heck yeah!" I think it's
right.
my favorite hatch of the year, because I think there's nothing else that makes fish dumber than eggs. And so,
egg
you
drunk.
can. What's that?
I say they're egg drunk.
They are egg drunk, and so almost all of our rivers in our area have a very large population of suckers, and so they'll migrate to gravel bars. And there'll be hundreds of them spawning and dumping eggs, and the trout will just sit behind them and just they will literally gorge themselves to the point where they look like giant footballs. They're so football.
I know what you mean.
And I've caught fish and taken the sucker spawn out, and I looked down and the fish was half vomiting eggs because it was just so full of it.
That's true.
And so I chase it, I watch it, and so it happens. Maybe it goes on for maybe a week.
Yeah, I was going to say at the most 2 weeks. Right. Gotcha.
And it's different. It seems like it's always during elevated water around here. And so,
nice.
We get a big influx of rain. It seems like last couple weeks of March, first week of April, depending on the year, and the rivers rise up, they get high. It feels like those suckers migrate and just start dumping eggs. And kind of the tell sign for me is if I fish through 3 or 4 really good runs that I usually catch fish out of, and they're empty, it's same thing as what you guys talk about, in the fall. Those runs are empty because all the fish are just literally stacked, big, small. All of them are stacked right behind those suckers.
That's almost I feel like they will do that. You're saying they do. They stage behind where they know those suckers are going to be.
Yeah.
And these trout are wise enough, smart enough, genetically programmed perhaps in that river system to know it's going to happen. And so let's say they're staging behind those suckers. Do you guys feel like they'll stage for hatches too, kind of winding back to this, how the bugs affect the trout? Do you feel like they'll kind of get ready for okay, every evening as the sun gets to this point, I see this sulfur spinner fall. I'm just going to go stage there. I'm not going to really eat until those spinners fall. Do you feel like that happens?
I do.
I feel like I see it with really large volume hatches. It feels like maybe the hour or two before it can be dead sometimes. And then all of a sudden bugs pour off and there's just fish feeding everywhere. They're just saving energy, or there's no need to expend energy because they know in 30 minutes they don't have to work at all, and food is just going to be right there for them.
They're waiting for it.
Yeah.
And think of other species just in nature. And how different species move to find a certain food source, whether they're following the oldest member of that, animal tribe or whatever, right? I mean, we don't know, but fish could be similar. You could have juvenile fish looking around the stream bottom and, hey, why did everybody move to the bank? And they could be programmed into doing that, but we'll never know, right? That's just a thought on how they get that stuff gets passed down through generations, possibly.
I think about sometimes you nymph through a run before the spinner fall happens or the hatch happens, and you don't catch anything, like you're saying, Bill. And you're thinking, well, there's no feeding fish in here, or maybe the population of fish through this stretch is pretty low to start with. And then you start your walk out, or the bugs start to drop, and you end up in that section again, and all of a sudden it's boiling, and you're thinking, oh man, had I never seen that, I would just assumed it's the fish's fault. But no.
Blame it on the fish.
Yeah.
I was going to ask if you guys have ever noticed any consistency in any change in prime lie during a hatch. I mean, we know what we're looking for when we're looking for big fish during regular feeding, but once a hatch starts, have you noticed any consistency in where you're going to find the most dominant trout?
To me, it seems like it's slow water near a bank with cover and structure for a bigger fish.
The hardest place to cast.
Right,
There you go.
exactly.
A lot of times.
You can
Good
see that
point.
bigger head coming up.
I think that's the deal a lot of the time. But if you get those low light conditions, and I found that big fish will go to eat a pheasant tail in that shallow water at the very, very head. But you have to have more than just the hatch, right? The light has to be good.
Yep.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden that
Good
fish
point.
can move into the head of that run and kind of take over because it's not worried about getting plucked out by predators or anything else.
And
Yeah.
when you get some rain and the water's elevating and you have the trifecta and you're good to go.
Right on. There you go. You're saying like everything has to kind of come together. It's the light conditions, it's the bugs happening and right water levels. At least things aren't blowing out. And then if the bugs are hatching, you have those right water temperatures a lot of times anyway. Yeah, a lot of these things just come together and we want to notice them. The more in tune you are with what the river is doing and therefore what the trout are doing, I don't know, I think the more you're going to be able to figure out that mystery every day. Hey, anything else, guys?
You need a Venn diagram of all the conditions and then where they overlay and how good the fishing
Nice.
will be.
All right. We'll post that to Troutbitten very soon. Bill
There we
Dell's Venn diagram.
Dom, one more thing on my end that I guess I didn't really notice until I came out here was I firmly believe that genetics play a role in what type of water some of these fish reside in. And I think when all said and done and all the spawning seasons are over and these fish all get back into the main river system out here, you can actually pick out the type of water that the different fish are going to be laying in. And so there's classic so-called cuddy water out here. And everybody talks about, that fish is going to be in cuddy water.
Nice.
And that's the slower water on the outside of a faster current, where if you move in and you start fishing that faster current, sure enough, you're gonna pluck the rainbows out of that part of the river. And then if you end up going into the bank, right, with the log, well there's your 20-inch brown trout. And it's crazy that you can sit there and almost call out the type of fish that you're gonna get. They're not all just spread out throughout the entire river. So it's interesting to see how they kind of take refuge in the rivers and that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's great to have that perspective. We do get a little locked in here to our wild brown trout because that's what we have. And we fished for wild brook trout, but that's again when we're going up into the mountains and so many things are different then. That's great. I love that perspective.
And then when they dump those stockies in, they'll sit in that, slower water.
Quite often. And they'll congregate.
Yep.
Fresh stockies especially are going to, you look how they grew up most of their lives in the tanks and then try to replicate that in the stream somewhere and you'll find 20 of them.
Yep.
All right, thanks guys. That's another good conversation. So finding feeding fish is really the first piece of the daily puzzle on the water. Like Austin said, we're out there not just hoping for something to happen, we're searching for clues to find the next bite window. And in between those heavy feeding periods, we have confidence that we can continue catching trout by understanding where they should be feeding and offering trout a great presentation. Seasons on the water and a curious mind is the simple formula for success. We take clues not just from our own history, but from the shared stories and experiences of our fishing friends, from books, articles, videos, and maybe even this podcast. Wherever and however we might learn, analytical anglers find feeding fish by observing the clues of water temperature, water levels and clarity, light conditions, hatches, and more. Find feeding fish. Where are the hungry ones? That answer starts with an educated guess and is refined by real-time on-the-river observations. And solving that puzzle might just be more than half the fun out there. Austin, will you read us out?
Yeah. So remember, Troutbitten.com is a free resource for all anglers. With over 800 articles, there are stories, commentaries, tactics, tips, and more. Find what you like through the top menu and through the search page. Navigate by way of the categories and the tags, too. Thank you for listening to the Troutbitten Podcast. Please give the show a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts and leave a comment, because it really helps. Until next time, friends, fish hard, enjoy the day, and find your life on the water. need a caddy.
Ooh, that's a good thing.
He yelled at me for fishing a pink worm before.
Disco ball.
I like March.
That's Fall Fish Willie.
Welcome back, Bill.
Maybe that's not funny.
I don't care. I mean, I still got my cushion.